He pointed the gun at the old man, not even realizing who was in front of him. A minute later, he was face down in the hood. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching this video from. The two-lane highway stretched like a faded ribbon across the sleepy Arkansas countryside, weaving gently through low-lying hills and forgotten towns where the only signs of life were half-lit diners and roadside churches with cracked parking lots. Morning mist clung to the shoulders of the road, curling lazily around pine stumps and fence posts, diffusing the rising sunlight into a dull gray glow. It was the kind of day that didn't feel like a beginning or an end, just another long breath in a place where time didn't hurry. The steady hum of tires broke the quiet, rolling in slow and certain. A weathered black Toyota Tundra crested the bend in the road, its headlights still on out of habit. Behind the wheel sat a man who moved like the road itself, calm, measured, and older than he looked. Chuck Norris wore a simple button-up shirt, sleeves cuffed at the wrist, jeans that had seen better days, and a scuffed pair of boots that hinted at dirt roads and work rather than red carpets. A beige ball cap was pulled low over his forehead, and a pair of sunglasses rested on the bridge of his nose, though the sun was still shy. Inside the cab, the radio played softly, old jazz, smooth and almost melancholic. He tapped the steering wheel lightly in rhythm, not out of boredom, but out of comfort. He didn't hum, he didn't sing, he didn't need to. The road was his melody, and he'd been driving it longer than most of the young men now pretending to guard it. He wasn't on any official errand, no entourage, no security detail. The night before, he had attended a private gathering for disabled veterans. No cameras, no autographs, just respect and shared silence. He stayed longer than he planned, shook every hand, and now, on the drive back to Texas, he felt the tug of fatigue settle in his shoulders. A gas station loomed ahead, modest and plain, with a sign that still bore half-lit neon letters, Crescent Fuel. He pulled in without hurry, engine rumbling low before it cut off completely. The place was nothing fancy. 2 rusted pumps, a dusty ice chest, and a faded soda vending machine with a button stuck on the root beer. But it was quiet. That was enough. Chuck stepped out of the truck and stretched his back. He was in his 80s, though his posture defied it. There was strength in the way he moved. Not the exaggerated stiffness of a man trying to show dominance, but the quiet readiness of someone who had nothing to prove. His shoulders didn't slouch. His steps didn't shuffle. When he walked, people noticed, not because he demanded it, but because something about him made the world pay attention. The gas station was nearly empty. A teenage boy mopped the concrete near the door, earbuds in, eyes glazed. Inside, the cashier, a stocky man with thinning hair and a camo hoodie, leaned on the counter, thumbing through a hunting magazine. Neither looked up when Chuck entered. He didn't expect them to. He made his way down the narrow aisles. He didn't need much, just a bottle of water, a black coffee, and maybe a granola bar. He didn't linger. No browsing, no idle chatter, just business. The old refrigerator hummed like a dying mosquito, and the coffee machine looked like it had survived 3 owners and a flood, but it worked. That was enough. By the time Chuck stepped back outside, steaming cup in hand, the morning had grown a bit louder. A crow cawed from a telephone pole. A semi-truck rumbled past on the highway. The mist had begun to lift, revealing a sky that promised heat by noon. He didn't notice the patrol car at first. The white Dodge Charger had come in hot, tires skimming gravel, headlights cutting hard even though the sun had risen. It skidded slightly before slamming to a stop 2 pumps away, not bothering with lines or courtesy. The driver's door swung open fast, and a man stepped out. Tall, square-shouldered, wearing the dark green uniform of a county deputy. His name was Officer Justin Crane, and he moved like a man who'd read too many stories about glory and hadn't lived enough life to know the difference. Early 30s, buzzed hair, sunglasses perched despite the overcast sky, and a jaw clenched like it had something to prove. His belt sagged slightly from the weight of an oversized sidearm, and his boots hit the concrete like they wanted applause. He didn't hesitate. "You with that vehicle?" he barked, motioning toward the tundra with a flick of his chin. Chuck turned slightly, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. "Yes, sir." Crane stepped closer, one hand resting on the grip of his pistol. "Keys?" he demanded. Chuck's brow furrowed just a touch, not out of confusion, but disappointment. "They're in the ignition." "Step away from the vehicle." There were no sirens, no calls, no reports. Just a young officer who didn't like what he thought he saw. A bearded older man in a truck with Texas plates, unshaven and silent, and clearly out of place in Crane's mind. He didn't need probable cause. His ego gave him that. "Registration?" Crane snapped. Chuck didn't move. "In the glove compartment." Crane's fingers twitched on the holster. "Name?" Chuck's voice remained steady. "Charles Norris." The pause that followed was small but meaningful. The name didn't register. It meant nothing to Crane. The world might have turned for it once, but this corner of it, this narrow-minded uniform, hadn't caught up. "I don't give a damn who you think you are," Crane said. "Open the door, slowly." Chuck didn't argue. He stepped toward the truck, movements controlled and deliberate. He wasn't looking to escalate. That wasn't his way. But the air had shifted now. Something brittle hung between them like dry timber waiting for a spark. From across the lot, a woman pumping gas paused. Her child peeked out from the back seat, wide-eyed. A man getting coffee inside noticed and came out, phone already in hand. The world had changed, and cameras didn't sleep anymore. Crane followed Chuck to the driver's side, still barking orders. "Hands where I can see them." Chuck placed the coffee on the roof of the truck and slowly turned his palms upward. The leather of his gloves creaked faintly. "You got ID?" "In my wallet, back pocket." "Get it, slowly." Chuck reached back, pulled the wallet, and opened it. Crane didn't look. He slapped the wallet out of Chuck's hand, sending it clattering to the ground. "Fake IDs are easy," he muttered. "You ain't special. You look real confident for someone so close to getting cuffed." Chuck stared at him, calm as ever. "I'm just here for coffee," he said. But Crane wasn't listening. He circled, eyes narrow, chest puffed. The kind of man who saw threat in stillness, challenge in silence. The kind who believed fear made order. He didn't know who stood before him. He didn't care. He only knew power, or thought he did. And somewhere behind his shades, Crane's mind was already writing the story of how he stopped a suspicious old man in a stolen truck, how he took control, how he showed strength. That story was about to shatter. And he wouldn't be the one holding the pen. Officer Justin Crane's hand hovered just above his holster now, the weight of imagined authority pushing down on his spine, making his steps more deliberate, his jaw more set. He stood close enough that Chuck could see the shallow flares of his nostrils each time he exhaled. The deputy's chest puffed under the strain of his bulletproof vest, not from effort, but from the sheer need to be seen, to dominate. The coffee Chuck had placed on the roof of the truck moments ago was still steaming, forgotten by both men as the temperature between them rose not with weather, but with something more dangerous. Unchecked ego. The moment hung heavy. Chuck didn't move. He didn't twitch, didn't fidget, didn't break eye contact. There was no defiance in his stance, only a stillness that could have been mistaken for submission, if one didn't know better. Crane sneered. "You think you're smart. You think if you play calm, I'll just walk away." Chuck's voice was even. "I think if you take a breath, you might remember who you're supposed to be." The words landed like bricks against a glass ego. The deputy took a step forward. Too close now, his shadow covering Chuck like a challenge. "You think you know something?" he barked. "You know how many lies I hear in a week? How many fakes come through here, thinking a little confidence gets them a pass?" Chuck gave no answer. There was no need. The truth didn't beg. Across the lot, more people had begun to notice. A man in a postal van pulled up and stayed in the driver's seat watching. A pair of high schoolers at Pump 5 stood frozen, their phones already pointed and recording. The tension was no longer just visible. It was contagious, pulsing outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. "You got a problem with law enforcement?" Crane growled, circling now like a predator with no understanding of the prey before him. "That it? You think the rules don't apply to you?" "I think respect goes both ways," Chuck said quietly. Crane barked a dry laugh, a humorless sound. "Man's got bumper sticker wisdom," he scoffed. "Who are you, huh? Retired biker? Prepper? You some kind of militia clown from out of state?" Chuck didn't answer. His patience was ironclad, not passive, not fearful, simply waiting, and that made Crane angrier. "I asked you a question," the deputy snapped, louder now. The noise turned heads. Even the clerk inside leaned forward against the counter, eyes narrowing toward the glass. Crane's hand went fully to his holster, thumb unbuttoning the strap in one sharp movement. The click was quiet, but it rang louder than any siren in the ears of those watching. "You're about 2 seconds from being on the ground," Crane said, voice lowering into a threat. "Now step away from the vehicle, place your hands on your head, and get down on your knees. Do it slow. I won't ask again." Chuck moved, slowly, as instructed. Not from fear, but because escalation wouldn't fix this. Not yet. He knelt, placing his hands behind his head, the sun catching his silver beard as he dipped his chin toward his chest. His breathing didn't quicken. His heart rate didn't spike. He had faced greater danger with less noise, but there was still a crackle in the air, a scent of something foul, something that wasn't just bad judgment, but the poison of a man drunk on authority. The deputy stood over him now, gun halfway drawn, the leather of the holster creaking. "Yeah, that's better," he muttered, almost to himself. "Look at you now, big man on his knees. Think you're too old for jail? Think again. I've hauled worse than you." Chuck said nothing. His eyes scanned what he could see from this position, the crowd growing, phones up, faces tense. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was spectacle. And Crane, in his self-appointed role as star, was thriving in the illusion of command. Then came the bait. "You know what I think?" Crane said, voice oily, sliding between words like a man narrating his own power trip. "I think this truck ain't yours. I think that wallet's fake. And I think you're just another old vet who thinks the world owes him something." Chuck kept his hands where they were, fingers locked. His jaw tightened slightly. The insult wasn't what stung. It was the waste of the badge, the duty, the uniform that had once meant something. Crane leaned down, face inches from Chuck's ear. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? No fancy speech now? No respect goes both ways crap?" Chuck's response was barely a breath. "Be careful." The words were soft, a warning, not a threat, but it registered as a challenge to Crane, who stepped back and pulled his weapon fully. "Hands where I can see them," he shouted, though Chuck's hands hadn't moved. "Don't you dare make a move." Gasps echoed from the spectators. A woman near Pump 3 turned her back to shield her daughter. One of the high schoolers muttered, "He's gonna shoot him. Oh my God, he's gonna shoot him." Crane paced a tight circle around Chuck now, gun-trained, adrenaline spiking beyond reason. "You recording this with your little buddies?" he asked. "Got someone in that truck watching? You think you're clever?" Chuck's head turned slightly. "You already lost control of this." Crane didn't understand. He thought it was defiance. He didn't see the second wave rolling in. From the highway, a black SUV turned off and approached the gas station quietly, its engine barely audible over the ambient noise. Tinted windows, government plates. It glided to a stop by the air pump, almost unnoticed until the driver's door opened and a tall woman stepped out. She wore all black. Black pants, black jacket, black boots. Her hair was pulled tight, her eyes covered by slim tactical shades, and in her ear, a comms piece blinked quietly. She walked like a person who didn't hesitate, like someone who'd already measured the threat and dismissed it. She stopped near the truck, glancing down at Chuck still kneeling on the pavement. Then she turned toward Crane and spoke with the sharpness of someone used to being obeyed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Crane turned, startled. "Excuse me?" She pulled a badge from her chest. "Senior Agent Kendra Moss, United States Department of Defense and Security. That man is my superior officer." Crane faltered. For the first time, his voice wavered. He claimed to be someone, didn't look real. "You pointed a loaded weapon at a federal official," Kendra said, stepping closer. "You drew without verification. You conducted an illegal search. Do you know what that is?" Crane's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "It's called a felony," she said coldly, "and you just committed it on camera." Another SUV pulled in behind hers. Two men stepped out, clean suits, hands free but ready. One approached Chuck, knelt, and whispered, "Deputy Norris, are you injured?" Chuck shook his head. "No." "Everything's being recorded," the man said, "civilian and federal. We've already alerted the district office. Confirming now." "Confirmed," Chuck replied. "You may stand, sir." Chuck rose slowly, brushing the dust from his jeans. He didn't say a word. Didn't look at Crane. But Crane looked at him now. Really looked. Recognition dawning, not as a name, but as presence. As the terrifying realization that he had completely misunderstood the scale of what he had started. A third SUV arrived. A man with sharp features and graying temples stepped out, flipping a badge as he walked. "Supervisory Special Agent Lyle Mercer," he said. "Deputy Crane, surrender your weapon. Step away from Deputy Norris." "You're serious?" Crane asked, voice cracking. "We're not asking." Crane didn't move. The agents behind Mercer shifted. Not drawing, just closing space. Kendra spoke again. "Don't make this worse." Crane finally unclipped his holster and handed over the pistol, grip first. His face was pale, hands trembling slightly. The crowd had grown quiet, not out of boredom, but reverence. Something had shifted. A man had been measured and found wanting. And the silence knew it. Chuck stood still, eyes calm. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't flinched. But the room, the town, the internet, and the law itself were no longer on Crane's side. And this was just the beginning. The air was no longer thick with tension. It had fractured, split open like glass under pressure. The moment Deputy Justin Crane handed over his firearm to Agent Mercer, the illusion of control he had clung to so tightly vanished. What remained was something else entirely. exposure. The kind that doesn't bruise skin, but dignity. And it spread like a scent in the wind, unmistakable and permanent. Chuck Norris stood tall, brushing the final bits of gravel dust from his jeans. His eyes, shielded by sunglasses, scanned the growing crowd with the same measured calm that had defined him since the first second of the encounter. There was no need for theatrics, no smirk, no triumphant gesture. He simply stood up because he could, because the threat had never been real, not for him, but for the rest of the country, watching through the eyes of bystanders' cameras. It had been too real. Agent Mercer gave a nod to one of his men who took possession of Crane's weapon with a procedural efficiency that left no room for ambiguity. The deputy's posture was still that of a man trying to hold on to a thread of control, but every fiber of that thread had frayed. Mercer didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. When he spoke again, the command came low, deliberate, and absolute. You're now under administrative detention, pending full review. You've conducted an unauthorized stop, drew your weapon on a federal official, and tampered with a secure government vehicle. You'll be escorted to the vehicle over there, where you'll remain monitored and recorded. Crane blinked, his lips parted in an attempt at protest, but the words never made it to sound. They weren't welcome here. Mercer gestured, and Crane, jaw clenched, obeyed. He walked stiffly toward the unmarked government sedan, the crowd parting for him like he wasn't a protector anymore, but something else entirely. An example. From the edge of the lot, a man's voice rang out. "I got the whole thing on video." A chorus followed. "Me too." He had the gun on that man the whole time. This guy was calm, never moved. The volume of voices was growing, but Chuck remained silent. His restraint said more than outrage ever could. Kendra Moss approached him again. Her tone was still professional, but now tinged with something harder to define. Respect, perhaps. "You good, sir?" Chuck gave a slight nod. Better now. Across the parking lot, phones were still raised, social media feeds still updating in real time. The news vans hadn't yet arrived, but it wouldn't be long. Mercer turned toward Chuck and spoke quietly, just between them. "We'll get the preliminary documentation done by noon. DHS has already been pinged from the plate ID alert. This footage, these witnesses, it's going to move fast. Are you ready for that?" Chuck didn't answer right away. His gaze traveled to the horizon where the mist had fully lifted and the day had grown sharp around the edges. Then he said simply, "Didn't ask for attention." "You didn't," Mercer agreed, "but it found you." Behind them, the gas station clerk had stepped outside. His name tag read Aaron. He wiped his hands on his apron, eyes darting between the agents and the sedan where Crane now sat, subdued and pale. "I've seen that cop before," Aaron said, voice low as he addressed one of the agents taking statements. "Always been jumpy. Got into it with a guy last month because he tried to buy beer 5 minutes before legal time. Screamed at me, too. Called me names. Whole town knows he's got a temper. You willing to make a formal statement?" Aaron looked past them to Chuck. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I don't want to end up with a gun in my face one day because someone doesn't like my jacket." Chuck caught none of that. His attention was on the bigger picture now. He was no stranger to high-pressure situations. He'd seen action in countries where laws were fragile and peace was a dream, not a given. He'd protected presidents, dignitaries, and carried burdens for people who'd never know his name. But this felt different. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a gas station. America. And he had knelt in silence under the threat of his own country's badge. He leaned against his truck now, not from fatigue but from deliberation. Mercer stood next to him, reviewing footage on a secure tablet that one of the agents had synced from civilian uploads. Grainy but clear. Crane drawing his weapon, Chuck kneeling, the insult, the silence, the calm. Then, in a flash, less than a second, Chuck's body moving with a precision honed by decades of discipline. They replayed the moment over and over. The sequence was identical each time. Crane raises the gun, Chuck's eyes narrow, his body shifts with controlled force. The weapon is gone, the deputy disarmed, restrained, and immobilized in a maneuver that was both clinical and effortless. No strikes, no brutality, no unnecessary force. Just control. And silence. He didn't even hit him, one of the agents muttered, almost with disbelief. He just handled it. He didn't need to hit him, Mercer said. He did something worse. He reminded him what it looks like when the badge doesn't protect you. More vehicles arrived, not from the local precinct, those calls had gone quiet, but from DHS and federal liaison units. Their presence was a formality now. The story had unfolded. The footage had told the truth, but the weight of what had just occurred was only beginning to settle. In the back of the government sedan, Crane sat motionless, hands resting on his knees. No cuffs had been applied. They weren't needed. The badge on his chest was no longer armor. It was now evidence. Chuck didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply asked, "Are we done here?" "Not yet," Mercer said. "We're just getting started. But your part, for now, is done." Chuck gave a nod and turned toward the crowd. His eyes passed over the faces. Young, old, black, white, anxious, angry. Some looked at him with admiration, others with shame. He didn't return their gaze long. It wasn't about them. It wasn't about being recognized. It never had been. But the message had already begun its journey. In homes, on phones, across cities and suburbs, in whispers and in hashtags. The man in the truck. The calm before the draw. The takedown without violence. Chuck Norris wasn't a headline. He was a warning, a mirror, and the world was watching. He stepped back into his truck and started the engine. The rumble was familiar, grounding. He took one last look in the side mirror at the place that had almost become a scene of irreversible tragedy. Crane was still in the car, staring straight ahead, lips pressed into a pale line, haunted not by a gun, but by a truth that couldn't be rewritten. Chuck pulled out slow and steady, tires kissing the pavement with the same rhythm as when he'd arrived. There were no sirens, no celebration, just gravity. Behind him, the agents returned to their vehicles, to paperwork, to protocol, and the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving the lot quieter than before, as though the storm had passed and the town was struggling to remember what normal had looked like. But nothing was normal now. Not anymore. And as the truck rolled down the road, Chuck didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need music. The silence was full of meaning. Every movement ahead would echo what had been done. And every headline would ask the same question. How many times had it happened without a camera? How many times had the outcome been different? But not today. Today, one move had been enough. By the time the black Toyota Tundra had vanished beyond the tree line at the edge of the highway, the parking lot of the Crescent Fuel had transformed into a theater of aftermath. What had started as a quiet morning drive interrupted by an aggressive cop had now become a national incident. The moment Chuck Norris pulled away, the storm began. Not of bullets or fists, but of footage, voices, and consequences. The gas station clerk, Aaron, was still standing outside, leaning against the frame of the door, watching the slow motion of government sedans pulling away, of DHS agents finalizing statements, of Deputy Justin Crane sitting hollow-eyed in the back seat of a car that he no longer had jurisdiction to leave. The authority he once wore like a weapon had melted off him in real time. There was no badge powerful enough to erase the video that now lived in the palms of a dozen bystanders and was already uploading across multiple social platforms. Inside one of the unmarked SUVs, Agent Kendra Moss sat with a laptop open on her knees. She scrolled through screen-recorded uploads already gathering tens of thousands of views. The angles differed, some shaky, others oddly cinematic, but the narrative was identical. A man calmly kneeling, a deputy screaming with a drawn weapon, then, in a blink, the takedown. Precise, controlled, silent. The captions accompanying the clips varied in tone, but not in message. He said he was just getting coffee. Chuck Norris doesn't kneel. He calculates. Cop tried it with the wrong man. This is how you stay alive. One particular video from a teenager named Eloquin03 had already hit 2 million views. She had titled it simply, "He Didn't Even Flinch." Her voice was in the background, trembling, whispering to a friend, "Is that Chuck Norris?" followed by the stunned gasp when Crane pulled his gun. The final frame captured the exact moment Crane was disarmed, the deputy's shock frozen in time as the camera panned to Chuck standing over him like a statue of composure. Across the nation, newsrooms pivoted. Editors cut into scheduled broadcasts, anchors reviewed footage between takes. By the time federal agents had finished collecting physical evidence and witness statements, the story had already leapt beyond their control. It was trending on Twitter, front-paged on Reddit, picked up by cable outlets. Reporters were calling every police department in Arkansas and Texas, trying to confirm details. Was it really Chuck Norris? What had happened? Was the officer arrested? Why hadn't there been an immediate press release? The questions multiplied, and they wouldn't stop. Back inside the DHS command vehicle, Supervisory Special Agent Mercer reviewed a preliminary report with 2 lieutenants. A printed screenshot of Crane's personnel file was clipped to the top of a manila folder, and it was damning. Multiple complaints of excessive force, informal warnings issued but never followed up with disciplinary action, questionable stops disproportionately targeting minorities and out-of-state travelers. 2 incidents involving drawn weapons over minor traffic disputes, both written off as miscommunication. No suspensions, no formal consequences. Until now. "He's been skating on culture," one of the lieutenants said. "Whole precinct's rotten, from what I'm hearing." "They all know," Mercer replied, "but no one wanted to be first to speak." Well, now they don't have a choice. In the corner of the vehicle, Chuck sat silently, his back straight, his arms resting loosely on his thighs. He wasn't watching the screen. He didn't need to. The footage didn't change what he knew. What had happened at that gas station wasn't new. It was just visible. And because it had happened to someone with a name, with a history, with a platform, even one he never asked for, the world was listening. One of the federal tech analysts, a woman named Rachel Fenwick, spoke up. "We're getting audio-confirmed uploads from 5 sources. 3 are clean with no cuts. 1 even caught the moment Deputy Crane opened the truck door without cause." Chuck nodded slightly. He never asked for permission. "That's tampering with a federal vehicle," Fenwick added. "He's in deep, whether he knows it or not." "He knows it now," Kendra said, her voice low, steady. The second he looked up and saw 3 SUVs rolling in, he knew. Mercer leaned forward. "What's the governor's office saying?" "They're quiet for now," Fenwick said, "but their communications team just requested a full timeline and witness summary. That's code for we're writing a statement." "And local law enforcement?" Radio silence, but the police chief's niece just tweeted that she's ashamed to be from this town. "It's going viral, too." Chuck didn't flinch. He didn't smile either. This wasn't a victory. It wasn't a moral to celebrate. It was a mirror, and too many people were seeing themselves in it. By late afternoon, the street outside the gas station was swarmed with news vans and curious locals. Cardboard signs began to appear, handwritten, raw, uncoordinated. "Respect is earned. Don't kneel with fear, rise with truth." He didn't say a word, but we heard everything. There were no chants, no riots, just presence, the kind that fills space with pressure, with purpose. Chuck remained inside the SUV, declining all requests for interviews. One journalist managed to approach the window, tapping lightly, mouthing the words, "Can we just ask your name?" Chuck didn't answer. Mercer leaned forward and pulled the privacy shade down. "He'll speak when he's ready," he said. But Chuck wasn't preparing a speech. He wasn't rehearsing. He was remembering. He remembered the moment the deputy's gun pointed inches from his head. Not the steel, not the heat, but the look in Crane's eyes. The belief that he could and should pull the trigger because his uniform allowed him to. That belief wasn't new. It had a lineage, and Chuck had seen it before, in different uniforms, different languages, different lands. But this was home. And that made it worse. Eventually, the agents moved their operation to a secured field office 15 miles away. The crowd remained at the station, now watched closely by local law enforcement, none of whom dared step onto the scene. Inside the field office, Chuck finally spoke. "I don't want to give a statement to the press." Mercer nodded. "Understood." "If they want to hear what I think," Chuck continued, "they can wait for the report." "You're going to get pressure," Mercer said. "Public, internal, political." "I've been under pressure before," Chuck said. "This isn't pressure. This is overdue." That night, after completing the initial documentation and allowing the DHS press liaison to prepare a minimal media brief, Chuck left quietly, returning to his sister's house 2 towns over. He didn't speak much during the drive. His niece, 12 years old, greeted him at the door with wide eyes and a tight hug. "I saw the video," she whispered. "Everyone's talking about you." Chuck knelt to meet her eyes. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "You didn't yell?" "No." "Why not?" Chuck looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because I didn't have to." Upstairs, news anchors debated everything from racial bias to police training to the risks of unverified stops. One outlet ran a headline calling it, "The Day the Wrong Cop Met the Right Man." Another referred to Chuck as a silent symbol of resistance. Cable news, never one to resist sensationalism, showed the takedown on loop every hour. But Chuck remained quiet. He didn't seek attention. The truth had already been seen. In Washington, senators requested internal reports. In Little Rock, the state attorney general scheduled a review. The Department of Justice requested a transcript. And in the town where it started, the police department released a 3-sentence statement calling the incident unfortunate and under review. People noticed what wasn't said. Chuck didn't respond. The next morning, protesters lined the police station sidewalk with signs bearing his face, not from action films, but from that single frame, kneeling, calm, unflinching. They didn't chant, they stood. That was enough. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was surgical, quiet, precise, like Chuck himself. And though he stayed silent, His presence had already done what speeches couldn't. The world had watched, and the badge, once seen as armor, now shimmered like glass. 3 weeks had passed since the gas station in the Spartanburg had transformed into the epicenter of a national conversation, and yet the name Chuck Norris still hovered on lips across America like a whispered invocation. Not as a punchline, not as a meme, but as a symbol, real, restrained, and human. And though he had made no public appearance beyond the events of that day, the world hadn't forgotten. If anything, the silence that followed had only deepened the resonance of what everyone had witnessed. Chuck had returned to his routine, if it could still be called that. He didn't change his number, didn't add security, didn't hire a press agent. He declined every interview, ignored every request from networks eager to host a hero. His only statement, if one could call it that, had been a brief line issued through the Department of Homeland Security's press office. The law is not a weapon, and those who carry it must know the weight, not just the power. That was it. The rest he left alone. Meanwhile, Deputy Justin Crane had been suspended without pay, pending a disciplinary hearing that the state had already determined would be open to public observation. His patrol record, once gathering dust behind bureaucratic walls, now lived under a magnifying glass. News anchors dissected his behavior. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Complaints that had once been filed and shelved under vague labels like resolved internally were now recirculating, this time under scrutiny that demanded answers, not excuses. The town of Spartanburg, known for its quiet days and even quieter politics, was no longer tucked away in obscurity. A local police department issued a statement, longer than the first, more carefully worded but no less hollow. They promised a full review of their engagement protocols and a renewed commitment to training. The public wasn't impressed. They had already seen enough. Chuck watched all of it unfold from a distance, like a man watching a storm from the edge of a field, knowing it was needed but regretting the crops it had flattened. He wasn't angry. Anger had no place in the clarity of what he had done. He wasn't vindicated either. This was never about revenge. He had done what was necessary because it was necessary, and that was the only reason worth moving for. One morning, he received an invitation. It came not from a journalist, not from a politician, but from a federal training facility in Glencoe, Georgia. The request was simple. Would he speak to a new class of recruits, young men and women preparing to enter federal law enforcement, most of them barely out of their 20s? Not about tactics, not about combat, about judgment, about presence, about the cost of silence and the weight of restraint. Chuck didn't answer immediately. He thought about it for a day, then another. On the third morning, he sent one word. Yes. The flight was quiet, uneventful. He wore no suit, no dark sunglasses, just jeans, a soft black shirt, and the same boots he had worn that day in Spartanburg. He carried no luggage, only a leather folder with a few handwritten notes. Nothing prepared, nothing polished. He didn't need rehearsals. He knew what he wanted to say. The room was modest. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow over gray walls and rows of folding chairs. There were no press cameras, no flags, just a podium, a PA system, and about 80 fresh-faced recruits in uniform, their eyes sharp with ambition, their backs straight with imagined certainty. Chuck stood behind the podium, fingers resting lightly on its edges. When he spoke, his voice carried, not loud but firm, the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to command attention. "I've spent more years in silence than most of you have spent in the field," he began. That's not a boast, it's a reality. The longer you do this job, the more you understand how much of it has nothing to do with speaking, or force, or even presence. It has to do with judgment, with clarity. He paused, letting the room settle. The recruits leaned in slightly. Not one of them glanced at a phone. Your job, Chuck continued, isn't just protection. It isn't just patrols and paperwork. It isn't wearing a badge. It's seeing. Seeing what's really happening when everything around you is moving too fast to explain. Seeing the difference between danger and difference. Between defiance and fear. A hand rose from the second row. A young man with short blonde hair and a nervous edge to his expression asked, "Sir, how do you train yourself to stay calm in a moment like that, with a gun in your face?" Chuck looked at him for a moment, not with judgment, but with the weight of experience. "You don't train for calm," he said. "You train for clarity, and clarity comes from listening, from knowing your own heart before the adrenaline kicks in. Ego doesn't help you in that moment. It gets people hurt. Listening keeps people alive." The young man nodded. Others scribbled notes, not because they were required to, but because they wanted to remember. After the session, some lingered. A few approached him with handshakes, cautious admiration. One young woman, no taller than 5'3", walked up and said, "My brother saw the video. He doesn't trust law enforcement, but after that day, he said maybe not all of them are bad. I just wanted you to know that." Chuck smiled, small and grateful. "Thank you." He left the facility as quietly as he had arrived, declining the offer of a driver, opting instead to walk part of the way back to his hotel under the deepening dusk. He didn't need light to navigate. The path was already known to him. That night, he sat on a small porch behind the hotel, sipping cold water and watching the line where the sky met the hills. His phone buzzed. A national op-ed had just been published. His full written statement, leaked from an internal training memo. He didn't read the article. Instead, he tapped out a short message to his niece. "Keep asking questions. That's how we fix things. Love you." Seconds later, she responded with a photo. A drawing. Him in his black shirt, standing next to a figure in a police uniform. Above them, in thick crayon, she had written, "Be better than what they expect." Chuck looked at the image for a long time. Not because it made things okay, nothing ever truly did, but because it reminded him that the work never ended. The fight wasn't about a moment. It was about what moments taught. In the days that followed, he returned to Texas, to his home, his land, his quiet. He never sought the cameras. When the world tried to drag him into its noise, he responded the only way he knew how, with silence that spoke louder than outrage, with presence that didn't need permission. The headlines faded, as they always do. New stories took their place. But the memory remained. The footage remained. The lesson remained. And those who watched, really watched, understood something vital. That dignity doesn't always shout. That justice doesn't always wear robes. And that strength, the kind that matters, doesn't demand attention. It just endures. Because when the world points a weapon at you, not a gun, but an assumption, a prejudice, a reflex, you don't always need to fight it with fists or fury. Sometimes all it takes is standing up after kneeling down, and walking away, still whole, still silent, still seen. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch our next videos for powerful stories like this one, and don't forget to share it with someone who needs to see it.